to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. I'm embarrassed.
Uh-oh. About what?
A couple weeks ago in my episode with Emily Lou, which was a fabulous episode. You weren't there. You listened to it. You loved it.
It was a fabulous episode. She dropped so much wisdom. I was like, oh, I'm learning shit on this.
I learned a lot. At the end, she was talking about her free training, which I've sent multiple of my clients. Like, I really want you to check her out. I want you to learn from her. The people who are actively looking for jobs, please check out Emily.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. At the end of the episode, when I was encouraging people, okay, like go take Emily's free training, I called it not once, but twice. Thankfully, not thrice, just twice. A webinar. Like
you hate that word.
and I make fun of you all the time for like using old people lingo and not being like current. And I freaking called that thing a webinar twice. Do a webinar? Answer me this. Do webinars even exist anymore?
They definitely exist in like
corporate,
the government.
Right? In like corporate America for people who are on their way out. Well, not for us.
I think VTC is still an
what
antiquated
is that?
Video teleconference.
No.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna VTC in. Yeah. That's a term I've heard.
That's like saying call me, beep me if you want to reach me.
Yeah. Yeah. It still exists in the corporate world, but we should not be propagating that anymore.
In one of my favorite podcasts of all time, My Dad Wrote a Porno. Truly, if you guys want to laugh until you cry and have like a strong stomach for very, very unsexy, but like that's why it's so funny. I know that this is like, why are you talking about this? I have a point. It's a bunch of Brits and this guy who's our age reads this very, very, very terrible series of like very short porno books that his dad has self-published on Amazon.
That's embarrassing. Woo.
That's the point. And it's a sensation. They've done like an HBO like special.
God.
No, they've made a lot of money off this podcast. We're talking like hundreds of millions of downloads. Okay. Anyway, the main character, because this is a man in his 60s writing about a woman in business who's 30, like doing deals and like, you know, getting it done any way she can.
Oh no.
She wears a pager in her garter.
Oh no.
So that's what I was like, oh my God, I'm that old when I said webinar. Anyway.
Oh no. Oh, it's so bad. It's good.
Anyway, truly like an antidepressant. If you are depressed, you cannot listen to that and be depressed.
What's the other, it was a show that you told me to watch, Righteous Gemstones.
Oh, the Righteous Gemstones.
Really funny and you can't be in a bad mood.
Well, as long as we're talking about TV that I really like right now, Righteous Gemstones it's also very dirty, but hilarious. Warning, if you want to see like full frontal male nudity or not, maybe avoid it. You don't mind it. It's so good. It's like, I don't know. I've never seen Succession because I don't care, but it's apparently like that, only a comedy and about a mega church pastor and his family, played by John Goodman and Danny McBride as his son. It's
next on my list.
It delivers. Also, yeah, really hard to be sad and watch that at the same time. Same is true of Mrs. Maisel. So good.
And
loving season 4
in a little while, but the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
I know.
If I ever am in a funk,
You just watched that and
Just
you're
watch
not.
any episode of that,
Yeah.
and I'm back.
Same with Grace and Frankie.
Yeah,
almost impossible to be sad while watching Grace and Frankie. Just can't be done. So anyway,
there's your antidepressant TV show prescription.
Anyway, so I just wanted to share that I was embarrassed about that, but we persevere. And okay, speaking of expert interviews, this is actually an expert interview. I lied. It's not a normal person interview. I brought my former client Chelsea on because Kristen, you have a normal person interview coming out next month, but that had to come out in April. So I had to do like 2 back-to-back. Plus we had the expert interview with Emily. So I had to do like 3 interviews. And I was like, I don't care if this is a normal person. I don't care if this is an expert. I just have to, this is a good conversation. And I don't care when it's coming out. This is when it's coming out.
And I doubt anyone cares.
No one cares
where we are in our podcast scheduling.
The difference is we don't talk about Chelsea's life at all. We talk about like the subject matter, which is the point of the expert interview.
Well, we haven't had a lot of experts in the last few months, so you're getting a doubled up dose of them. That's great.
Yeah. So why don't you read her bio and then I'll talk a little bit about this episode.
Okay. Chelsea Jewell is an intuitive and karmic astrologer and a spiritual advisor to the visionaries and conscious leaders of the world. She has guided hundreds of people to forge deeper connections with their soul's purpose through her readings, coaching practice, and her intuitive astrology course, Discover Your Stars. You can find her on Instagram at ChelseaJewel33 and online at soulfuljourneycoaching.com.
Chelsea is a delight. And I miss coaching her already. It hasn't been that long since she actually went to IPEC, the same coach training school you and I went to, but she's within the last couple of years, she went through IPEC. So she's,
but it sounds like she brings more of the spiritual and astrology approach into coaching, which is a cool blend. I haven't actually heard of a lot of those. I've heard of astrologers and
not only that, but doing that with business people too, not just with normal people, like helping you kind of align your business to your deeper soul's purpose. And
very cool.
It's pretty cool. But because she is qualified to speak to this, I had a whole conversation with her about manifestation. Like
we haven't really talked much about that.
We've talked around it a lot. But we've never had like an episode like
about that
directly, just about that.
Actually kind of crazy now that I think back on it, because it is a subtext of a lot of conversations, but let's just go hard at it from in the front door.
So we talk about like what it is, what it isn't, what happens when maybe there's a clash between you trying to manifest something and your soul's agenda. We got into a lot of stuff. I feel like you're going to really like this episode, no matter like where you fall on the spectrum of this is new to me and this is weird to I am old hat at this, like give it to me. I think you're going to like it regardless.
I'm excited about this one. When you first told me the topic, I was like, yeah, we need to answer some of these questions. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions. So I'm sure you get into that.
Yes. So anyway, enjoy, keep an open mind. If you're, I don't know, maybe you're new to Clarity on Fire and you're like, I thought this was going to be about finding a career, Rachel. And it's like, it is, bitch. We're going to manifest it. Shut up and listen.
Yeah. There's some logistics and there's some spiritual traction, both and.
You got to have both. Okay. So enjoy. And I will come back at the end. Hey, Chelsea.
Hi.
I am speaking to you. Well, you're speaking to me from Colombia, of all places.
Yes, I am in Medellin, Colombia. It's beautiful here.
What's the weather like?
So Medellin is like the city of eternal spring. So it's like constantly spring weather. It's like been in the 70s and there's usually like some sort of rainstorm almost every day, but it's beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really nice.
I didn't really know there was a place that existed that had like ideal spring weather year round. That's very enticing.
The other thing, if I'm just going to sell Medellin, like the other thing that's amazing about it, I guess because of like the elevation we're at, there's no mosquitoes almost. Like you're sort of in the middle of this tropical jungle, or it's not really tropical, but like there's all this green, but there's no mosquitoes. It's amazing.
That's a big selling point for me as someone who is, I'm one of those people who mosquitoes think are a delicacy, and I'll be standing with a group of people and I'll get like 10 like bug bites and they'll get nothing. And I don't understand what it is. I don't know if it's like a blood type thing or whatever, but that's okay. Well, maybe I'll have to end up there one day.
Yeah, add it to your list for the mosquito-less green vibes alone.
Okay, great. So, okay. I know what we intended to talk about, but I've sort of been sitting and I'm trying to figure out where to begin, because I feel like we can't just dive into like the level of conversation that you and I would probably have without probably backing it up and giving people a little bit of a runway up into what we actually want to talk about. So,
cool. Yeah.
You and I are both very intuitive people in different ways. We're both, very comfortable with talking about the universe and manifesting stuff and all of the levels of woo-woo stuff. But for people who might be relatively new to that, or people who are maybe questioning or curious, I think that there's probably a lot of assumptions about what some of this stuff means. And so I think before we just dive in and we start talking about like manifesting and some of like the philosophy and our questions behind what it actually means and what it looks like, I think we should stop and go back. And I would like you to try, and I can help too, but I want to hear your take. How would you actually define manifesting, period? Because I think people have very different interpretations of what that actually means.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I feel like, first of all, manifesting is a really big like gateway into spirituality for a lot of people. Like I know for me, it was part of the law of attraction, and trying to manifest like a specific guy was part of how I got really hooked into spirituality. So that's what I think a lot of people like assume it is. It's like getting what you want, basically, like deciding what you want and using the powers of the universe to get it. And I think that is like part of it. But like in a broader sense, I don't know, I have to think about this a little bit. I guess at the end of the day, the way I would sort of think about it, it is about like co-creating the life you want with the powers of the universe or source or whatever you want to call it. But I think what's important to note is that there's like different levels of it. I think a lot of us come into manifestation wanting very like tangible, material, specific things. Not that that's bad, but a lot of times like our souls aren't really in alignment with that. So the actual game of manifestation ends up changing what we want as we like do more and more spiritual work on the path to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree that there are levels and that people often start out on a more surface plane. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's often many people's like gateway and entry into spirituality. And to be honest, I think it was kind of mine. It was definitely one of the big ways that I got into it when I sort of discovered, oh my gosh, a decade ago or something, the law of attraction. And then it was fun to start just trying to manifest things. Like it really makes you feel like you're a wizard who just didn't get their Hogwarts letter and is now an adult and is learning it now in adulthood. But so here's how I have sort of come to understand what manifesting is. I think that very basically, if I were to boil it down, my understanding is that everything is energy. We are energy. Everything that we're looking at and that we're touching is made up of moving particles. Even if you can't see them moving on some, very, 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 very tiny level, they are. Everything is kind of vibrating at a slightly different frequency. And like energy attracts like energy, like magnets. Things that are similar are drawn to each other. And so if you are on a certain, if you're vibrating on a certain frequency, you are going to naturally draw to you thoughts, not just things, but thoughts and feelings and things that match what you're offering. And so manifesting makes it sound like it's a very conscious practice, but on, I think, a more accurate level, we are constantly always manifesting. The way that we are constantly subject to the law of gravity, whether or not you believe in gravity or even know the word gravity, you are subject to it. You don't have to understand it to know that, like, if I jump off this 20-foot building, I'm going to fall. And so I think manifesting, or you can call it something different, but co-creating or attracting or whatever, is something we're always doing. And so I think it's funny when people think that they manifested something because something good happened. And then when something maybe not great happened, they're like, I didn't create that. And I'm like, but we can't selectively create. Like, if we look outside of ourselves, often what we're seeing and what we're experiencing is a result of unconsciously or consciously where we're hanging out on a daily basis. And so I want to make a caveat, because I know that when people hear that, they start thinking, well, what about all the starving children in the world? And what about all of, like, the abused pets in the world? And how are they, attracting that? And that's probably a whole different hour-long conversation. But maybe we will get into that later. I don't know. But what I tend to think about that is that often you get born into, or you get thrust into, when you're young and you're malleable and you still don't know how to think, you get sort of conditioned into certain frequencies by the people around you. And so often what we are kind of offering is completely unconscious, just based on what we've been taught to believe. And so much of coaching, and the work I do and the work you do is about helping people break free from that conditioning, so that they can ultimately raise their frequency, start offering a different vibration of some kind, and be a match to better things. So, okay, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to ask, what's your feedback about that?
Well, I love that definition and spiel of manifestation. And I totally agree. We're always doing it. It makes me think too of, sometimes I don't love the phrase manifestation or manifesting because of what you just said. Like, it causes us, I don't know, it takes away some of that energy of, like, we're always doing it. And sometimes there's this, like, pressure we put on ourselves of, oh, I have to do this the right way. Like, I have to say my affirmations in exactly the right way on the full moon at the right time. Not that those things, like, aren't helpful and great, but sometimes we get, like, very locked into, it's actually, I feel like a lot of manifestation culture can be a trap for a lot of us, like, recovering perfectionists, of
absolutely
them thinking we have to, like, control every single thing in order to manifest exactly what we want. And I feel like everything you just said leads into some of the conversation we were planning on talking about, which is, like, karmic manifestation, and the fact that not, like, we bring karma and energy and vibration and conditioning of our soul with us from past lives, if you want to subscribe to the theory of reincarnation, which I do. So, for a starving child in Africa, or someone who, like, grew up in an abusive home, it's not that, like, their soul manifested that from day one. It's like that was part of a lesson they had to learn as a result of past karma, maybe.
Which doesn't necessarily mean that people did something bad. It might mean, again, if you subscribe to the idea that, like, we don't just come here once, we come here multiple times and our souls have an agenda, then it might be part of some grander plan or lesson that they chose to learn based on experiences that they've had in times before, which is I think can be a very easy way for certain people to bypass other people's pain and struggle. Like, oh, well, they chose that on some soul level. And that doesn't mean that we don't have humanity. It doesn't mean that we can't help people and that we can't strive to make the world a better place. Because why the hell would we choose to be human if we didn't want to actually have human experiences and solve human problems? So I don't think that any of that is an excuse to ignore other people's pain or suffering or struggle. But I do think it helps. Do think it helps give you a bird's eye view to why any people might, have actually on some level need to have a certain experience or have chosen to have a certain experience. And it's not necessarily up to you to fix everyone's experience or to assume that they're having the wrong experience or that you're having the wrong experience. So before we get too far down that path, though, I do want to just I want to comment a little bit on the perfectionism thing, because I think you're totally right. I think one of the most freeing things I learned sort of about manifestation at the beginning was that it's not a catalog. Like, the universe is not a catalog, and you're not a catalog as if this is 1999, but whatever, right? Like, the universe is not the Delia's catalog or like the JCPenney catalog, y'all. You can't just, the point is not just to just order up a convertible just because you want a convertible, right? Like, if you want to do that, if you want to try that just for the fun of it, do it, right? Like, you can absolutely try to manifest things because you want to prove that your thoughts create your reality and that when you focus on something, it's drawn to you. That's why it's really fun to read books like E Squared, which I will link to the book club episode Kristen and I did on that a couple of years ago, because it helps you prove your own power. But that's absolutely not where really the point of manifestation, nor like where it should stop. Like you said, that's the surface level. And then I think you're totally right that when we start getting a little bit deeper and we start understanding, okay, maybe the point of manifestation is not to get everything my mind thinks that I want, but maybe it's to do more of what Tosha Silver would say. I will link to our book club on outrageous openness and the one about It's Not Your Money, because she wrote both of those books. That the point of manifestation is being open to what you need and what the universe wants to give you, which likely will far exceed what your mind can come up with. And so at that point, that's when we'll start kind of doing rituals, or we'll like write out our new moon intentions, or we'll burn stuff, right? Like, we'll start sort of, instead of trying to manifest a certain thing, we'll try to create, sort of habits and rituals or whatever for drawing in whatever the universe wants to give us. And then we start panicking because we're like, am I doing it wrong when I'm not getting the results that I was hoping to get? And so we're like, wait. Did I not write out my intentions properly? Did I not use the right words? As if we are at Hogwarts and the right incantation really matters, which it doesn't. Your intention is what matters more than anything. So let's throw out the idea that there's a perfect way or structure to try to create anything.
Yeah. And I think I would add to that, your intention is what matters most, and how you end up receiving or responding to whatever shows up for you. Because if you're so attached to the idea of I'm going to make $1 million this year, and if I don't, that means I'm blocked or I'm manifesting wrong or I'm doing something wrong, and you end up receiving something totally different. If you respond to whatever you do receive, like a pouty little 5-year-old and stomping your feet, metaphorically, maybe, that is going to end up putting you on a self-fulfilling spiral of lower vibration, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and I think that you're bringing up a really good point about how do you know that what you're receiving isn't exactly what you asked for? You just can't recognize it as such. This I really freaking struggle with, because you and I talked about this, and then Kristen and I had a whole episode a couple months back about what's the point of pain and what's the point of struggle. And I have really struggled to integrate the belief that when I'm struggling, something hasn't gone wrong. That pain is not an indicator that something's gone wrong. And what I've come to witness about manifestation over and over and over again is that sometimes you call experiences to you that maybe suck and that are really hard, but it's not because you did something wrong. It's because you said, I want this particular thing. And maybe the most direct path to that is through that quagmire. Or maybe the only way you're going to become a match to that thing that you ultimately want is by having to learn some hard lessons now. Mm-hmm. And so manifestation does not always mean I get good things. You know, it means sometimes I ask for something and then I'm handed a difficult assignment to help me become a match to what I said I wanted.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what was just coming to me when you were saying that is also like, even in because I think we can get very obsessed and perfectionist with like, am I saying at a high vibrational level? And just because you're in a period of suffering or pain or like things not going well doesn't necessarily mean that is like pulling you into a lower vibration. It may just be part of what you're saying, like the road to the next thing. And I recently in January, I did my first plant medicine ceremony with ayahuasca. And this was like a really big theme of what I learned in my ceremony. I think I had been operating under the impression for a long time, like you, that if things went wrong or if things didn't go the way I expected, or if I was quote, unquote, suffering, that meant I was doing something wrong and it needed to be fixed. And I learned a lot through my ayahuasca ceremony that suffering or pain or difficult things is not a reprimand or like a referendum on how you're doing. It's part of being human. And again, it like has to do with how you receive those difficult periods and difficult lessons.
Yeah. Yep. Back to the idea that like, why would let's say you don't believe in the idea of past lives. That's fine. You don't have to, I don't care what people believe. But okay, let's say you're just here one time. Okay. If you believe that you have some sort of degree of soul or, you know, higher self that is kind of eternal and that exists beyond the confines of your human body, then again, what was the point of being human if not to have some sort of human experience? And humanity clearly is not designed to only ever be happy and to only ever get good things and to never struggle. Like struggle and pain are part of learning. And so you can't assume that when that's happening, something has gone wrong, because I think the whole point of you being here was to have a human experience. Mm-hmm. There was so much that you just said that I want to touch on, but I think one of the questions that's bubbling up for me is, what do you think? Because I have opinions about this. What do you think about I guess the theory, the idea, the notion that the universe tests you?
Oh, yeah. I go back and forth on this one a lot because I do sort of feel that way sometimes. But whenever I get really wrapped up in that belief that the universe tests you, it's when I'm most prone to falling back into like my perfectionist, I want to get an A on this test then tendencies, instead of like just sort of receiving and going with whatever's presented. I think what's coming to me now is not that the universe tests you in a way that's set up to pass or fail, but I do think that when you are like in the process of maybe clearing old karmic patterns or changing some of that conditioning that keeps you maybe like stuck in an old vibrational level, sort of like we were talking about, maybe like a better word to look at it is like the universe presents you with opportunities to either stay in that same level or to up level, for lack of a better word, into a different vibrational state. And so that to us often feels like a test. But to me, it's sort of showing up like it's showing up as like this two paths diverging in the woods. And it's not that necessarily one is better than the other, although I think our human minds would say like, no, we want to up level and get out of this vibrational karmic pattern. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't believe, I'm kind of with you. I don't really believe that the universe tests us in the way that I think we interpret a test to mean. And I think you're right that when we think of it as a test, then we think we're somehow being punished almost. Like it's too close to me to punishment. And I don't think the universe punishes people. I think that I agree that sometimes what we interpret as a test is more of what we just talked about. It's you've drawn an opportunity to you that is going to help you like break free of some pattern that you're trying to get rid of, or to help you get closer to what you said that you wanted. And so I don't necessarily think that like the universe is sitting there, like, I don't know, like with its evil mastermind fingers twiddling, right? Going, like, let me test this person with this, with this challenge, or this, this ex-boyfriend coming back into your life. I think that sometimes things, happen because you might need that contrast. Like you might need that ex-boyfriend to come back to shake things up and really help you discern, is this the person that I want to be a match to for the rest of my life? And if not, then I'm going to say no, and I'm going to move on. Like, I don't think that we're being tested in this like literal, in this literal sense.
Yeah. And I think the other challenge I have with the concept of being tested is it, like you said, it forces us into a sort of mindset around punishment and judgment. And it's like a very linear way of thinking. And so if we do believe in the idea of being tested by the universe, that's when we usually assume that like whenever something bad or challenging happens, that is the result, that like, oh, we have obviously failed a test somewhere and this is our punishment. When in reality, like you're saying, it's not, like maybe that's just what we need. And the real quote, quote, test or opportunity is not in what we've received. And that's our grade. It's like, that is the opportunity that's being presented of how we end up responding to it. So the problem I have with thinking that way is that we often like stop playing the game, assuming that we've failed the test already, when it's really just like the opportunity's just been presented.
Yep. 100%. I also just thought, as you were talking, I think that when you assume you're being tested, it makes it so much easier to question your worthiness to have what you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, I'm having to prove that I deserve this, or that I'm good enough for this. And I know for a fact the universe is not asking you to prove your worthiness. That, the universe in its infinite intelligence would know that you're already worthy of what you want. It's not a matter of whether you deserve it. It's a matter of whether you're ready for it. And so a test, quote unquote, is not an opportunity to like prove how good you are or how enough you are. It's just an opportunity for you to get closer to what you say you want.
Yeah.
And to clarify maybe what you want.
Yeah. And for you to really like believe that you do deserve it.
Yeah. Right. Because the universe might know you deserve it, but you might not really believe that you deserve it. Right. So, and I've absolutely fallen in that trap many a time, where it feels like, oh, I guess I can't, I'm being tested and I'm failing because I can't, this is really, really, really hard. And I'm having a hard time staying positive in the midst of this. And so I must not be a match to what I want. And then that feels defeating. And then I'm even more depressed because I can't, because I don't have what it takes, quote unquote.
Yeah. And that's again like bypassing the whole human experience of maybe you're
Right.
not meant to be positive and happy right now in this
All the
situation.
time. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I had that thought, I have gotten wrapped up around things like money and like business, but very often I get wrapped up in these thoughts around romantic relationships because, anyone who's listened to Forever Alone or who has listened to this podcast, even occasionally has heard me talk about my journey through singledom and, being single for over 9 years. You have a lot of opportunities to blame yourself for clearly you've done something wrong, right? Like clearly you suck at manifestation. If you have been single that long, like it is very easy to take responsibility when it feels like you've been trying to get something this whole time and you're just not getting it. And so, anyway, I've fallen into that trap over and over and over again of believing that I guess I just haven't done enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just haven't like passed this test with flying colors enough yet. Like, and it's a recipe for insanity.
Yeah.
And so I would recommend not just insanity, but also like really low self-esteem and being in this really like vicious cycle where it feels like you're never succeeding and you're never doing enough. And then that makes you feel like shit about yourself, which makes you feel like you're in an even lower vibration, which makes you even more frustrated because you're like, now I'm even further away from the thing that I want. And I'm just digging myself in deeper and deeper and deeper, and I can't stop it. And that's where the madness lies.
Yeah.
So,
one more thing I was going to add to that. One of the things I have realized earlier this year that keeps me in that circle of madness and that circle of sort of blaming myself is like, as someone who is very spiritual and committed to personal growth, anytime I'm not getting what I want or something challenging or difficult happens, I'm always trying to find the lesson in it. And so usually that leads me to ask like, okay, why is this happening? And let me sort of figure it out. And I had the realization at the beginning of this year that asking that question over and over again of why is this happening actually is me, oftentimes is actually me resisting what's happening and trying to fix it and getting back into that perfectionist mindset of like, why is this happening? There's an assumption under there that what's happening is not correct or is not in alignment with what I think should be happening. So asking sometimes that loop of like trying to find the deeper meaning or the higher purpose of whatever we're going through is part of what sends us into the spiral of trying to fix it and then creating more and more resistance to what's actually going on.
Oh, that is so true. That I think that you're right. How think about it, like in life, how often do you actually understand the lesson you're learning while you're learning it?
Yeah.
Lessons are usually things that we define and label in hindsight, way in hindsight sometimes. And so I agree that sometimes spiritual people are going through a hard time. And there's this unconscious belief that if we can just figure out why I'm going through it, then it will stop. Because again, there's this also this belief that if I'm having an experience I don't like, I shouldn't be having it. Right. And so if I can understand it, maybe I can transform it and change it.
And like get out of sort of like cheat code through the lesson or the quote, quote test or whatever. Like I'm going to outsmart the universe and like skip 3 grades and try and graduate from this early.
Exactly. So, speaking of Harry Potter, this is just what's coming to mind right now. And so it's like a really strong visual. So I'm just going to share it. You know, that part, it's actually not true to the book, but whatever. In the movie, in the Sorcerer's Stone, when they're going through the trapdoor and they land in the devil's snare, Hermione's like, stop struggling. Like you're making it worse. Like if you relax your body, it's going to let go. And then she falls through the floor. And then Harry's like, okay, I can do that. And then Ron just will not stop struggling. And eventually she has to free him using sunlight because he just is making it worse. Right. I think that people have a really hard time surrendering when they're in the midst of something hard because it just feels so wrong to not do anything when you feel like you're starting to be choked by the proverbial devil snare of your life situation.
Yeah.
And it feels like you have to fight, right? And so trying to understand it is like a conscious person's version of fighting back. And right. And I think that the surrender is the relaxing of like, okay, I don't have to understand this. I don't have to like this. But if I push against it, I'm probably just going to make it worse. So if I can allow what's happening to be for right now without needing to understand it, without needing to label it, I will pass through it quicker. Like that's the point, is that you're not just surrendering it and laying down and like curling up in a ball and giving up. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is I think actually making things ultimately easier on yourself, but we have a hard time submitting to it in the moment.
Yes, I love this idea. I don't know if you've read the book Radical Acceptance. Have you heard of that?
I don't think I have. I've heard of it, but who wrote it? Do you remember?
It's Tara Brock or something like that.
No, I haven't read that, but I have heard of it.
Yeah, it's really good. That could be a good upcoming book club one. And going back to what I was talking about, my ayahuasca ceremony, this was one of my intentions. One of my main intentions going into that ceremony was to surrender to whatever needed to come up for me. And sort of like you said before, like, who says that whatever we're receiving is not actually exactly in line with our intentions and what we wanted to receive? So my ayahuasca experience was not just intellectually understanding the concept of surrender, which is my usual MO. Like I will go read a bunch of books and listen to podcasts and whatever to understand like, okay, what is surrender? How do I do it? What's the best way to surrender? My ceremony was literally like an embodiment of surrender. And not to like get too graphic, but oftentimes for most people, when you do ayahuasca and you're in a plant medicine ceremony, you will have cycles of purging. And that comes like in different forms. For a lot of people, it comes in the form of throwing up. And that was like where the biggest lesson of surrender came in for me, because I found when that was happening, or even when I could feel like nausea come up, I felt the like resistance and the fight and the struggle, like you're talking about, come up. And
right.
So much of what I learned was exactly what you're saying, like to relax. And in my experience, it was directly tied to my breath. And it was directly tied to like, when you're exhaling, release any attachment you have to what should be going on or the suffering you don't think you should be having. And when you breathe in, like breathe in whatever is coming up for you, like whatever is in front of you. But whenever those like cycles of nausea or purging came up, I like wouldn't breathe. Everything would tighten and I was afraid to breathe because I was resisting it and I didn't want it to happen. And it was like such a powerful lesson to me. And I wrote down in my notebook that night, sort of like the theme, one of the themes we keep touching on is that actually like my greatest teachers that evening from that ceremony were the biggest struggles and challenges that I faced, and sort of the triggers that put me into those struggles, like the cycles of purging were where I got some of my deepest lessons.
Yeah. I mean, right. I think that contrast is the biggest teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't understand what it is to be cold if we've never been hot. Like you don't even know what cold is if all you've ever done is live in cold climate. Like you don't you don't have any context. So we just often, I think we call in experiences that give us contrast. Because contrast is what teaches us, okay, this is what I know I don't like or what I don't want. And then on the other side of that, the relief of that bad experience ending, or the clarity that comes when you finally know what you do want, it feels so good. Again, because you didn't feel like that before. And so to think that contrast is bad is, I think, really misguided, because it's part of how we learn and grow and appreciate our experience.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree.
Okay. Now I feel like we can talk about like why we actually wanted to have this conversation in the first place. Was you and I were having a coaching session a few months ago, and we got on the topic of what you would call karmic manifestation, which is, okay, what happens when, well, tell me if I'm explaining this wrong, but I think the question was, what happens when you think you want something, but like, what if your soul has a different agenda? And how do we know that what we want is what we want? And what if the reason we're not getting what we want is because we're actually not supposed to have it? And I don't know that at that moment we came up with any really firm conclusions, but I think it's a really good conversation that I don't think we've ever really had on this podcast. So how good of a job did I do describing that? And how would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. Like, our soul knows on a deeper level what we need. And that's where, when we talk about this concept of manifestation and like writing out all of the things we want and the things that, like you said before, our mind wants, or even our ego wants for sometimes. This is where sometimes I'm like, sometimes that can be very limiting, because what if that's not aligned with what my soul wants or needs? And also, what if what my soul actually wants and needs is way bigger than what my mind can conceive and write down on a sheet of paper, and I'm actually blocking that big, amazing thing from coming in because I'm just writing down what my mind can conceive of. I also have, on the topic of karmic manifestation, I went back, and Tosha Silver, I started reading It's Not Your Money when I was in coaching with you, and she talks about this concept as well. And she, maybe like to give people a concrete example, she uses the example of how Jim Carrey, when he first started as an actor, he wrote himself a check for $10 million from the quote, quote, Universal Bank. And he, like, I think he went on Oprah and talked about this and how he basically believed so strongly that that $10 million is going to come in. He ended up manifesting it in physical reality. And so a lot of people went after that and started writing themselves $10 million checks from the universe and like hanging it on their walls. And Tosha says, this book comes from a singular premise. Everybody has a different set of abundance lessons they're learning in any given lifetime. It may not be your own destiny to have $10 million. That might actually be the last thing your soul needs. You might be learning this lifetime to trust you'll always have enough. And the more you open to divine source, the more you will. And so she talks about how the law of attraction or manifestation intertwines with the law of karma and the lessons and experiences that our soul actually needs for the deepest level of fulfillment, not just the fulfillment of like those kind of surface level wishes.
Okay. So this is, that's a really helpful example. And I think what's coming up for me is, okay, how do we reconcile that, like your soul having its own agenda that you're not always aware of, with not distrusting your desire? Because I've been on here for 4 years telling people it's okay to want what you want, and having, and that your desires are often proof that what you want is possible. I have an episode about that. I will link to it in the show notes. I think it's called something like, it's a side chat called mind-blowing time-bending analogy or something like that. I believe that our desires aren't random. That if we want something, it's because on some level you can have it. But because otherwise, why would you have it, right? There's so many things you could want that you're completely uninterested in. So if there's something you want, there must be a particular reason why you want it. And so I'm not telling people distrust your desire at all. And maybe the way I would describe it is, I think sometimes there can be a mistranslation between your soul's agenda and how your mind is interpreting your desire. Because maybe some of those people who wrote themselves $10 million checks after watching Jim Carrey on Oprah, what their desire is for is abundance or freedom or not wanting to have to worry about money, or wanting to be able to quit their awful job and have something that fulfills them. And $10 million may or may not actually solve any of those problems. Like, again, there's people who win the lottery who go bankrupt a year later because they weren't maybe actually ready to receive that amount of money. And, they kind of spent it all. So maybe we're translating that desire for abundance and freedom and fulfilling work as sure would be nice to have $10 million. And maybe, our soul and the universe knows, no, there's a better path for us to get to the heart of that desire. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that is where we start to shift when we're in the process of trying to manifest and attract these things to us, where we end up having to go a little bit broader of shifting from, yes, I want $10 million to I am attracting the feeling of abundance or financial security. And then the other part of it is you start to, there's this thing I've been playing around with, and I don't think I invented it, but I have been using this term for it called changing your mirrors, where basically everything in the universe is a mirror to you, and it's mirroring to you what you believe in, what you believe you are worthy of, and sort of your vibrational level. And so part of, I guess, one of the next parts of the manifestation process is then intentionally looking at everything that is coming into your reality and being mirrored to you through the lens of, oh, this is showing me how abundant I am. If you're working on attracting abundance, it can be as simple as being wow, look at, I'm looking out my window right now and I see a tree and there are literally hundreds of thousands of leaves on this tree. That is a mirror of abundance to me. And it's sort of a positive confirmation bias, but it's using that part of our brains and our psychology to affirm to you that oh yeah, the universe is showing me how abundant I am. It's not coming just through money or $10 million or this one specific channel I wanted it and expected it to come through, but it's actually helping me relax and surrender into the energy of what I'm calling in anyways, in an even bigger, more encompassing way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that this can be tricky because I'm familiar with the everything is a mirror way of thinking. And I think it can be very tempting to then go, guess I'm shit because everything I'm looking at is shit, right? So I must be shit too if I'm a mirror and everything's a mirror. However, I would stay away from that judgment because there is no good or bad judgment from the universe. The universe isn't saying, look, you're shit. Here's some shit. You deserve it. It's saying, okay, this is a reflection of your belief right now. So, okay, if you believe that, everything sucks and that you're never going to find what you want, then when you look outside, you're going to see things that mirror back to you your belief that there's not enough or that the world is like a shady place and people are going to take advantage of you. And it's 100% possible. It's what I do all day in coaching, to change what you're looking at and what you're seeing. And that goes both ways, to not only change you so that you start seeing the world differently because your perspective and the lens through which you see yourself and the world has changed, but also when you choose to, like you just said, find examples outside of you that are mirroring back a potential different reality. Because absolutely, the brain is really good at looking for evidence of what it already believes and ignoring evidence to the contrary. So if you start purposefully looking for evidence of abundance in ways that most people wouldn't think of, like the leaves on the tree, right? Like the universe is an abundant place. Let me look for evidence of it. All of a sudden, you will start seeing more of that. And then that will start to influence and change your internal beliefs. And as your internal beliefs change, your external reality will change, and it becomes a positive feedback loop. So it's 100% possible to change the mirror. But yes, if you can think of the mirror as just, this is telling me right now what I'm focusing on. And if I don't like what I'm seeing, can I change what I'm thinking and what I'm focusing on?
Right. It may be like, there's a mirror in front of you that is reflecting, like, it looks in my mind right now, like one of those pictures that has like a million different things going on, almost like a Where's Waldo sort of picture. And it's like, okay, this is my mirror, but now I have to intentionally shift my focus from looking at like this guy who just dropped his coffee all over the person next to him to something else going on in the scene of this woman staring at a bird and she's super happy or whatever.
Right.
And I will say, like, I think, because I know you talk a lot about spiritual bypassing, and sometimes this process can feel that way. And sometimes it is maybe like you're intentionally choosing to focus on what is going well, on what you're grateful for, on what is confirming to you the things that you want to start believing in. But maybe that's okay if you are doing that intentionally, and you're still also allowing yourself to feel shitty sometimes or cry or be angry. Like this is not exclusively just feel good, but it is like at a certain point, okay, this happened. I've processed my emotions around it. Let me focus on the positive, or what went well, or what's helping and supporting me in this.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because there are so many potential paradoxes in this whole conversation, and it can be hard to navigate them. And that's I think that's part of the journey of anyone who wants to be more spiritual or more tapped in, is you have to learn how to negotiate those paradoxes for yourself. But this is one of them, that on one hand, we're over here telling you, surrender to everything that's happening. And, you don't need to label it. You don't need to understand it. And then on the other hand, we're over here going, hey, but look at the the leaves on the trees, and look at the abundance. And is that not some version of, could that be a version of trying to escape how you're feeling? And it could be sometimes. But I think that Tosha, to bring it back to her, said it really well when she said, feel how you need to feel, right up until it becomes self-indulgent, and then do something else. And so, you absolutely can rail against, your reality, and you can be upset, and you can be pissed, and you can feel that. And then when you kind of get sick of yourself, then it's a really good idea to maybe start looking for evidence that something else could be true. Okay. I have one big last question for you that I don't know why I feel compelled to ask you, but I don't know. We're just going to do it. What would you tell someone like me, from all of your experience, your wisdom as a coach, your understanding of manifestation and how it works? What would you tell someone like me who comes to you and says, hey, I've been single for a really long time, and are you sure that I'm not doing anything wrong? And what if, here's I don't actually fear this, but here would be my inner critic's biggest fear. And I think a lot of people would probably feel like this is, I really, really, really believe that I meant to have a fulfilling romantic relationship, but how do I know if maybe my soul doesn't, have that agenda? Like, what if the reason I've been single this whole time is because that's not actually my soul's agenda, even though I really want it? How would you respond to that anxiety?
It's a really good question. I think this probably like isn't the answer. And by the way, I'm in the same boat. Like I'm single and desire a fulfilling romantic relationship. So I get it. I think it is, speaking of paradoxes, I think it is both possible to want, desire, and long for something like a fulfilling romantic relationship, and at the same time release attachment to it ever happening. And maybe to bring it to a different example that maybe doesn't feel quite so like intense, when I do like intuitive readings, astrology readings, and all of that. And when I first was really like going into my spiritual awakening and working on developing my own intuition, I had this really strong desire to give readings to people. Like I had been working with this woman who told me, she was a psychic. She was like, you're going to be giving readings to people. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And I sort of was like waiting for something to turn on in me to where I felt confident enough, like in my intuition and my own intuitive abilities to do this. And I knew it was something, especially because this psychic told me it was going to happen. And I had the desire for it. I knew, and I had confidence and trust that it would happen. But the only thing that, like when things actually started to open up for me was when I finally said, like, you know what? I want this. Someone told me it's going to happen. I believe it's going to happen, but I'm good. Like, I have to be okay with the reality that it may never happen. And it's like very counterintuitive because we're talking about like, yes, your desires are proof that you can have what you want, but you do sometimes have to lean into like releasing the attachment to them. And the way to do that is to sort of like, or the way I do that is to sort of fast forward and say like, even if I end up being single for the rest of my life, that's okay. I do this a lot too, like when I go into readings or like even like a podcast recording like this, if I find myself very attached to the outcome, I'll say like to myself, even if this is the worst reading I ever give, even if I completely bomb and mess up this podcast interview and it like makes no sense or whatever, and I try and get really comfortable with like the thing that I absolutely don't want, that's part of the process of surrender and releasing attachment. So if someone like you came and asked me that, I would say, of course you can, and you probably will have a romantic, fulfilling relationship, but you need to really get right with the idea that what if it doesn't? Because that's when you find like the sweet spot of then what's going to happen is you're going to live your life like, all right, if I live my life assuming that I'm never actually going to have this relationship, like that sucks. And maybe I grieve that and cry and stomp around for a while around that to like adjust to it. But then after a while, I'm going to get sick of that. And I'm going to say like, all right, assuming that I'm going to be single forever, what do I want to do to make my life more fun? And just sort of like not give enough because I'm not trying to attract anyone anymore. I might as well just like enjoy this journey on my own. And that's ultimately like kind of like reverse psychology on yourself. That's ultimately what ends up giving you the energy to attract the person you're going to attract.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna offer a slightly different perspective on this for people like me who have a really hard time actually getting to the point where they can be like, and that's okay if that never happens. Mm-hmm. Because I'm gonna tell you right now, I have never gotten to the point and probably will never because I'm so fucking stubborn. It's just not going to happen. Like I refuse to get to the point where I'm like, and I'm okay with that because I'm not like because the honest to God truth is I'm not okay with that. And saying I am would be a lie. Mm-hmm. So here's where I've gotten. It's okay that I can't It's okay that I can't surrender that.
Mhm.
Like in a weird roundabout way, I'm surrendering the fact that I can't surrender it. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's
Like,
what Tosha Silver says too about offering. Like when you don't
right,
know how to surrender or offer, say, okay, I'm offering this, but I don't know how to surrender this.
right, right. I'm just like, you know what? It's okay that I can't let that go. Right. Because if I'm afraid that, oh, I can't let that go. And so I'm messing it up. Right.
Mhm.
Like I'm doing it wrong because I can't just let that go. That's going to give me more anxiety
Mhm.
and put me through turmoil that I don't need to go through. If I'm like, you know what, whatever, it's okay that I can't let that go. That's actually like a much better version of surrender. So then I would have been capable of giving otherwise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and also I feel like one of the reasons I have a hard time surrendering that is because I think when you're trying to make peace with something that's so absolute, like, okay, let me try to make peace with the idea that this will never happen.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult thing for your mind to wrap its head around. So I think what I find easier to surrender is, okay, it's not happening right now.
Right.
Like, but tomorrow could be a different story. Or next year, you just never know what's going to happen. So let me make peace with where I'm at right now. I don't need to make peace with the future because the future doesn't fucking exist.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of where I land because I think otherwise I start to get a little bit nauseous at the idea of trying to make peace with something literally never happening.
Mhm.
I think that's maybe too big for our minds to comprehend and also might be a little presumptuous, right? Like, because we don't know what the hell's going to happen.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just a matter of being okay with what's happening right now. And that's it. That's all you have to do is make some version of peace with now.
I think that's a great point. And one of the teachers who I've been learning from recently, her name is Kendra Kunov, and she talks about this too. And she calls it getting right with reality. And you're basically like going through and you're not making judgments about reality, but you're accepting everything that is happening in this moment, including the way you're feeling, including what you're having trouble surrendering or believing in. And that also, like, that feels a lot better a lot of times than sort of like affirmations of, because sometimes those like don't feel true to us, like a lot of people will use affirmations to help their manifestation as well. And but getting right with reality is the process of surrender, is the process of radical acceptance of what is true in this moment and accepting and being okay with that. So yeah, I love that perspective.
Yeah. So I guess the way I would answer my question if I came to me as a coach and I was sharing that anxiety is I would say, listen, you don't typically have that strong of a desire for no reason. That desire is rooted in something that probably is meant for you to have. However, you don't have to give up the desire, but you do have to give up your mental agenda around it. Because your soul's agenda might be for you to be single for longer than you would ideally have wanted to be. And, you might not meet that person until later in, life than you intended. And they might not be the person that you envisioned, right? Like you might need to give up your mental definition of how that should happen. You never have to completely give up on a desire period, but you just need to be open to, okay, the real point is I want to feel romantic connection. I want to feel fulfillment. I want to feel a sense of real partnership with another person. And I'm open to the universe guiding me toward the fulfillment of what I really want and letting go of my mental agenda around how it looks and the timing around that and just finding peace with where I'm at now, which doesn't mean I don't often rail against where I'm at now and get pissed that like, why hasn't this happened yet? Like I'm allowed to have a human reaction to it, but ultimately I then sort of have to make peace with where I'm at now because this is what's happening. And being pissed every day about what's happening isn't going to get me any closer to what I actually want.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll add to that is sort of like we've been talking this whole time about, just because you're suffering or going through a challenge or hardship doesn't mean that something is wrong that needs to be fixed. I think the same can be applied to having an unfulfilled desire. And like, that is so uncomfortable for us to have a desire or a longing that is not fulfilled. But that doesn't, just because it's unfulfilled right now, doesn't mean that that desire is wrong. And it doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. But that's part of, like, exactly what you were saying a minute ago, is like part of what we need to radically accept and surrender is the fact that we have this longing and this desire that right now is not being met. And that's okay.
Yes. Right. There's nothing wrong with hunger.
Yeah.
Hunger is just a sign that you have a need or have a desire that hasn't been filled, but there's nothing, like, we don't get mad at ourselves when we're hungry. We eat. And unfortunately, with these types of desires, it's not as easy to just go eat to satiate our hunger. So we have to learn to sometimes be uncomfortable in the discomfort of having a longing that hasn't been met, or finding ways to tend to yourself and sort of try to meet your own needs, even when there's this larger need that has as yet gone unmet. And that might be part of the reason why the desire hasn't been met yet, is so that you can learn to take care of yourself, so that you can learn to, like, be a good parent or a good partner to yourself. And, you know, that I think that there's usually a gap between wanting something and receiving it. And sometimes I think the larger that gap is, the more important of a sort of a karmic lesson it serves, right? Like, it's like, if it's that big of a desire and it has that much buildup and that much sort of like runway to actually lift off, then it's clear that, to me, I think it's clear that there must be some soul agenda stuff happening there, because otherwise it would have been easier to get it. And it wouldn't have mattered as much to you. The more things matter and the longer they can sometimes take. Yeah, I think that maybe the more important it was for you on some on some soul agenda level.
Yeah. And again, that's not necessarily for us to figure out in the moment what that soul agenda is, because that's how we drive ourselves crazy again.
Right.
But I totally agree.
Yeah. I think the last thing I would say is that I think your desire for anything, but particularly the stronger your desire is, like your desire, I want you guys to think about particularly your desires around the most important, biggest things, like your top 3, things that you most want that you don't have right now. I think that your desires are sort of the broadcast signal of your soul's agenda, but your human self might be doing a not great job at translating that at times. And it tries to understand it, and it tries to fit it into like a logical box, and it tries to put time constraints around it. And I think it's enough to say, okay, if I have a really, really strong desire for something, it probably is, it's not unrelated to my soul's agenda. It's probably an exact consequence, like, of my soul's agenda. And I might need to release my expectation around how that gets met, when that gets met, what that actually looks like, and just trust that if I have that desire and I keep showing up every day in a way that's aligned to me, like I pursue things that make me feel, high frequency, I focus on feeling good, then ultimately I'm gonna end up physically rendezvousing with that thing that I want at some point. But that I don't need to try to make it happen. I just need to focus on feeling good.
Yeah. And I think that sort of going back to one of the things you said at the very beginning, the one thing that I think has helped me the most in the world of manifestation and radical acceptance has been setting the intention, like setting my intention to either like receive something like a loving partnership. And then the next part is the hardest part, is trusting that whatever comes to you in the space, no matter how long it is between actually like receiving what it is you want, trusting that that intention is being met somehow, even when it doesn't seem like it.
Yep. Like believing that everything is part of the plot to get you there.
Yeah. Like,
yeah,
we often think that the challenges or the unfulfilled desires are obstacles and roadblocks that are blocking us from our highest path, but it's all part of the curriculum that's for us.
Yeah. Like back to plot, no one would want to watch a show like that where there's no conflict and there's nothing goes wrong. That's not a story. And so I think we don't give our lives enough credit for having something in common with good stories, which is sometimes bad things need to happen to teach the characters something. And and it doesn't, maybe in the moment, they think things are going wrong, but what they don't know is that this is leading them exactly where they set out to go.
Mm-hmm.
So the same is happening for us all of the time, whether you really believe it or not.
Amen.
Okay. Wow. I mean, we could literally keep talking for another hour. I mean, there's just no end to this stuff.
Yeah.
But we've probably given people quite enough to process for now. So we'll let them sit with that. So, tell people where, okay. Well, honestly, we read your bio, so they kind of got an idea at the beginning of who you are and what you do, but tell people where they can find you and if there's anything in particular you think they should do after listening to this conversation.
Okay. Well, the most frequent place where I'm at is on Instagram. I'm at Chelsea Jewel 33. I do intuitive and karmic astrology readings. So part of the thing that's fascinating about what we've been talking about is I can't like see your exact like karmic timeline in this lifetime from your astrology chart, but I can see a lot of the bigger patterns and themes from your chart of what you're here to heal and release and reclaim and work with. So I do those in astrology readings, or I have what's called like a past, present, future reading that is focused on a specific karmic pattern. So anyone who's been interested in this conversation, that might be something you want to check out. And then I also do one-on-one coaching, spiritual and astrological business coaching. So yeah, check me out on Instagram and reach out, and I'd love to hear from you.
I will link to everything in the show notes. So yeah, I highly recommend people follow you. And I love that you're also doing this for people in business, not just like normal people, because I think so much of that like karma plays out when people start a business. Like business is such a spiritual pursuit in a lot of ways. And it will bring up all of your stuff. And I think it's really great that instead of necessarily helping people like, hey, let's like work on your marketing plan, it's like, let's guide you through whatever this like, big journey you just took on is actually bringing up for you on a deeper level and healing it. So that you can be more of a magnet to abundance or whatever it is you want, wherever you started a business in the first place. So I'll also link to all of the episodes I mentioned, plus maybe some that I haven't that are, I think, deeply related to this topic. So that if you are new to the concept of, manifestation or the law of attraction or, anything that we've talked about and you're curious, but maybe this conversation was like, too much too soon or like too much of like a dive into the deep end, that you can go back and listen to some of the other episodes that will give you a good foundation to start practicing this stuff and just start maybe proving to yourself that you have more power than you think you do. So, Chelsea, thank you. This was so fun.
Thank you.
I'm glad that karmically we decided to meet up in this lifetime.
I so agree. I'm so glad too.
I feel that way about all my clients, whether or not they agree. I just feel like, okay, here we are. Like, we have come together for a reason. Like, you wouldn't be here unless you were supposed to be here. And right, like, I wouldn't be the right coach for you if we weren't here talking.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I think about that all the time.
Yeah, it's like the self-confirming intention belief.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, thank you. And I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye.
Bye. You know what I was thinking right after we recorded the intro was, oh, we had Emily on to talk about the like more logical, action-oriented,
steps.
exactly practical part of getting a job. And now we had Chelsea on to talk about the art of attracting one.
We totally planned that.
It's almost like we knew what we were doing. So I linked to in the show notes a few episodes that are must listens. If you are interested in this topic, got to listen to that bonus book club we did on Outrageous Openness by Tosha Silver from November 2018. Take your little thumb and scroll very far back. Also her book about money. It's called It's Not Your Money. We did a bonus book club on that in, when was that? February 2019, I think. And it's listed in the show notes. And then also E Squared by Pam Grout.
I'm sure you did E Squared.
January 2020, when we did that episode. So those are a few must listens and also must reads if you then want to go read those books. If you want to get on this manifestation train, but you want to do it in like the better way than just treating the universe like a, I don't know, like a J.C. Penney catalog from 1995.
The Secret style.
The Secret, just like The Secret. Yes.
Yeah, I would say Tosha's books are going to be more on the purely spiritual and some astrology side. Yeah. And E Squared is going to be a little bit more, I don't want to say scientific, but it kind of is. It's a little bit more technical. Explain the but it's fun too. Don't. It's
kind of corny even.
It's silly. It's a little silly, but it is, but in a fun way. And it's actually walking through experiments to manifest things. Yeah. So whichever one appeals to you, it's a good next step.
Listen to them all and then go with whichever your gut feels.
Do a little digging on Amazon or wherever your favorite bookstore is and read descriptions and go with what feels good.
Okay. Thanks for explaining to people how to look up books. I didn't think, you know what? Maybe they need that. Maybe they're listening to webinars too, and they also need to.
Well, I'm saying don't just take our suggestions for it. Go read a little bit and see if it speaks to you.
I mean, yeah. Well, that's why I'm telling them to listen to the episode, because then they can just listen and they can decide if they want to read the book.
Exactly, because we give you the highlight reel.
It's basically the cliff notes, the spark notes.
Plus, we want you to listen to more of our podcasts, so win-win.
Yeah, always that, I guess. Okay, well, that's enough from us. I think you've had enough today. I think I have.
As always, we will see you next Friday
with a side chat. Boy, do I think it's going to be a doozy based on what I currently think I want to talk about. Okay. So I don't know. Just strap in and be ready.
See you then, I guess.